Financial Observer's upcoming Aged Care Summit will help advisors stay on top of changes in the evolving aged care space. Here to tell us some more about some of these developments is Aged Care Guru's principal, Rachel Lane. Rachel, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Rachel, what are some of the major regulatory developments that have happened in the aged care space in the last 12 months?
Well, the loss of the exemptions when people choose to keep and rent their former home is probably the biggest legislative change we've seen, and that kind of partnered with the changes to the pension asset test, which are affecting people who are moving into retirement villages as well as aged care.
And what are the implications of these changes for advisors?
Well, I mean, whether or not you choose to keep the former home, there are still advantages to that. There's still a $162,000 asset test cap for aged care purposes. There's still a 2-year asset test exemption. You just don't have the capacity to keep and rent the house and have exemptions being applied to that rent for pension and aged care purposes. So it's not to say that it's completely removed all of the advantages from the strategy, but certainly people need to look at the strategy, particularly if they're going to rent the former home, and understand the impacts of that.
Right, so just sort of rethinking that and whether it's still appropriate for certain clients.
Yeah.
And what are the options for clients who are maybe getting to the stage where they do need to consider some aged care?
Yeah, I guess a lot of people intrinsically link the words aged care with nursing home. And it's really interesting when you look at the statistics that the majority of people, so more than 80% of people who receive aged care in this country, don't live in an aged care facility. So I think what we'll see is, because of the increasing numbers of people getting aged care, we'll just see more advice around the choices that people are making external to an aged care facility. So choices like living with family, building granny flats, or just entering into a granny flat arrangement with children or grandchildren, moving into retirement villages. Land lease communities are certainly an emerging property decision for seniors, as well as the more traditional residential aged care, where the care needs dictate that that's what the person requires.
And is there a particular option that tends to be more popular, or does it depend on the client's circumstances?
Yeah, it depends on a whole host of things. In a lot of families, the first port of call is not a residential aged care facility. I know in my family, when my grandmother needed care, the first port of call was not to say, okay, and this is despite me working in this industry, the first port of call was to say, okay, what help and support does she need to keep living at home as independently as possible? Not saying that we will discount residential aged care ever, but it's just not the first step in the process for us. For other people, residential aged care is the first step in the process, because generally a medical event leads to a hospital stay, and the hospital say, look, this person can't live at home. So it really is horses for courses, and I guess that's the thing I'm most passionate about, is helping advisors provide advice across the spectrum of aged care choices. We see a lot of great advice in the residential aged care space, and a lot of advisors are still unsure about how to provide really good advice around granny flats or retirement villages or land lease communities, and yet they're the majority of choices that people are making. So that's where I'd really like to see the advice space grow.
And that sort of leads into the next question, which is, how important is advisors' role in educating clients about their aged care options?
Oh, it's critical. And I think that when people are unable to get advice, it almost invalidates their decision. So if somebody goes to a financial advisor and says, I'm thinking about moving in with mum, I understand that this may be a granny flat arrangement, or I'm thinking about building a granny flat in the backyard for mum, or whatever it might be, and the financial advisor says, well, that's not an aged care choice, or we don't provide advice on that, it can be really tough on that client to think, well, is this the right decision? If I can't get advice about this decision, or if it seems to be quite complex for the financial advisor, should we really be going down this path?
So advisors sort of need to get better at understanding those more, flexible options that clients can have, as opposed to just necessarily going into a facility.
Yeah, I think, and validating those choices. At the moment, we see a lot of comparisons being drawn between retirement villages that deliver care often through home care packages and private care in combination. Comparing that with moving into residential aged care, that's quite a common thing at the moment.
And what other major changes do you think there will be on the horizon that advisors and clients need to be aware of in the aged care space?
Well, there's currently a review of the guarantee around accommodation bonds, or what we currently know as refundable accommodation deposits. So I think, you know, that's about $20 billion that sits on Treasury's balance sheet. I think if the government could find a way of the industry ensuring that for themselves, they'd like to do that. And I think that'll probably be the next big change to the industry.
Great, Rachel, thanks for joining me.
No worries, thanks.